In this year's election, people in Boston will vote for new city councilors in 3 districts. One of them is District 2, currently represented by Bill Linehan. The district includes South Boston, the South End, Chinatown, and the Leather District. Our guest is one of the candidates in the preliminary election, September 26th. We'd like to welcome Erica Tritta. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, talk about your background both in law and child welfare.
Well, thank you. I've been working in child welfare in various capacities for the last 20 years. My interest in the field started when I was in college. I went to college down in Atlanta, and I did work there representing children with attorneys who are in the child welfare system. And since that time, I've served in different roles as a volunteer, as a social worker, as a lawyer. And for the last 10 years, I've practiced as an attorney in Suffolk County, and I represent children and parents in child welfare matters.
And of course, I think a lot of these are, I guess, maybe children at risk or whole families at risk.
It is. It's working with a whole family. So specifically, I represent either a child or a parent, because you'd have a conflict if you represented both. And so the whole family is at risk, first of state involvement. So the Department of Children and Families represents the state. And so they've stepped in for some reason. And there's a myriad of reasons, whether it's lack of supervision of their children, to addiction issues, to lack of housing. There's a myriad of reasons why DCF may come in to a family's life. And so for all of those reasons, then the court process starts, and attorneys like myself represent the child or represent a parent in, oftentimes trying to reunify the family.
I can see how, in a way, this is related to concerns on the city council, but how do you go from that to actually wanting to be a counselor? What made you do this?
So I see the work that I do as advocacy work. So I work very much on an individual basis. For each of my clients, I advocate whether they need housing, they need access to resources for, I mentioned addiction is a big issue, access to rehabilitation issues around addiction, or access for children to the right education. So I do that every day on an individual basis. And I think Boston is a great city, and so I decided to take it a step further to try to be the advocate for all residents of District 2, to try to make Boston a place where everybody who wants to live here can. And by that, it's whether or not it's affordable for them, whether they have access to the education their children need, whether they have access to the health resources they need, both physical health as well as mental health services here in the city. So it's taking that leap from an individual capacity for advocacy to a larger capacity as to all of the residents of District 2.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Erica Tritta, candidate for City Council in District 2. Erica, talk about making housing affordable. One proposal before the council already is to have stronger protections for tenants, namely in terms of just cause eviction. Would you vote for something like that?
I do support the just cause eviction bill that the City Council is currently with the City Council. It's for larger unit landlords. It's not for the the people who, landlords who own just a few units. It's 7 or more, I believe, is the threshold cutoff. And there are still grounds for eviction, lack of payment and other issues where landlords can move forward with eviction. It's not taking that recourse out of a landlord's hand, but it is giving tenants some ability to stay put if they are abiding by the lease terms, if they are paying their rent. And it's also a way to track evictions, which we don't currently have. And that is concerning to anybody who lives on a moderate income in the city trying to stay here.
Of course, one of the other things about housing, and there's a lot more of it being built in this district, maybe not so inexpensive, but there's also concerns about traffic, especially around this proposal for the former site of the Boston Edison plant. What would you like to see done to make that work?
So that's certainly a concern. So the Edison plant that they are proposing, the current proposal is for, I believe, 1,800 units plus commercial space plus hotels plus businesses. And so, I recently submitted my comments on the current proposal, and my concern is certainly, as you mentioned, transportation. We don't have the infrastructure in South Boston, especially that end of South Boston, to have that type of traffic. So I think that the transportation infrastructure needs to change first. So we currently can't support all the people who need to take, for example, the 7 and the 9, the certain buses that come from that end of South Boston into the city. So if you imagine the amount of traffic, both the construction of that project would would create, as well as the people who would live and work there. Until we set up, they're looking at expanding the Silver Line. I think that needs to be examined further to see if that's an option. We need something more than just a city bus that stops every other block that can't even manage our capacity right now, before we allow such a large project to be even considered.
One idea I've heard kicked around is having a bus rapid transit, in a restricted lane, a faster ride. Would something like that work, maybe?
I mean, possibly, but I still don't know. So, that's being talked. If it would be on East to West Broadway, specifically, if we're talking about that, as well as somewhere straight into the city. I mean, I don't know that we have the space for a dedicated lane, to be quite frank, on East to West Broadway. But certainly buses that don't make every stop is a possibility. Creating a rapid transit of, a reduced number of stops is a possibility. That's something the MBTA could do now without much change, but they haven't yet. But I do think that is definitely possible.
Turning to the schools, the city is spending more money out of its own budget for the school system, but money is down from other sources, and a lot of parents out there, they're very upset about programs being cut. What do you think should be done?
So I certainly think that we should be looking at other sources of revenue. I know that's being talked a lot about as far as the pilot program, trying to increase the city's revenue.
Those are the contributions from universities and nonprofits?
Yeah, so certain institutions in the city that get reduced to significantly reduced real estate taxes because of their nonprofit status, like hospitals, like higher education institutions, Suffolk, BU, quite a few others, and so increasing the revenue that way. But it's also examining the Boston Public Schools budget to see how it can best be spent. But it's a mix of both finding new revenue sources, increasing the ones we have, and spending the money that we have the best way.
And finally, I should mention that if people want to get more information about your campaign, anything that they should do, probably about that?
So they can certainly reach out to me and look for me on Facebook. That is where I am as a candidate. It's a work in progress. All of my social media, just in trying to reach out to my constituents. I'm also attending events, any that I can, and people call me at my office at 617-391-0882, and that's how some people are getting in touch with me. Because through this campaign, I'm still working. So trying to balance that and reaching out to as many residents of District 2 as possible.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Tritta, candidate for City Council in District 2.